My apartment is on the 4th floor of a pre-war brick building in Chicago. The kind where the groans of the floorboards and the hiss of the steam radiators are the soundtrack to your life. As a freelance graphic designer, my world is mostly confined to these 4 walls. My only real window to the outside world is the one in my living room, which looks directly across the courtyard into apartment 4B, Mr. Langston's apartment. I didn't know much about him, other than that he was a ghost long before he was dead. A stooped, skinny man who seemed to carry the weight of his years on his shoulders. We'd trade the occasional nod in the hallway, which always smelled of old dust and floor polish. He was a man of the past, of bulky CRT televisions and game shows like Wheel of Fortune or The Price is Right. I knew this because almost every night the familiar sound of canned applause and spinning wheels would drift across the courtyard from his window. The volume would eventually fade, and I'd picture him dozing off in his threadbare floral armchair. Last week, he died. They found him on the cracked linoleum of his kitchen floor. The coroner's report called it a massive coronary, a sad, lonely death typical for an old man living alone in a big city. Our perpetually sour-faced landlord, Mr. Henderson, mumbled some half-assed condolences while overseeing a locksmith change the locks. For security reasons, he'd said to no one in particular. The power to the unit, of course, was shut off by the electric company. Apartment 4B fell silent, a black hole directly opposite my living room window. The peace lasted exactly 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I jolted awake. Something was wrong. A strange, monotonous, persistent sound. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound, it was static. Not just any static. It was loud, violent, and aggressive, like someone had cranked the volume to max and walked away. I glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. 2:13 a.m. A cold dread trickled down my spine. The sound was coming from 4B. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. Tiptoeing to the window, I carefully parted the blinds. Mr. Langston's apartment was dark, but through his own thin curtains I could see a faint flickering light, the light of a television screen displaying a dead channel. Impossible, I whispered to myself. The power's been cut. I tried to reason it away. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the sound was echoing from another apartment, distorted by the building's architecture. I went back to bed, pulling the comforter over my head, but the static still cut through the thick fabric, a high-pitched screech that scraped at my eardrums. It only stopped abruptly when the first hint of dawn painted the Chicago sky. The next night, it happened again. Exactly at 2:13 a.m., the shriek of static tore through the building's silence. This time, a morbid curiosity overtook my fear. I decided to run an experiment. I turned off every light in my apartment, plunging the room into near total darkness. Instantly, the static seemed to get louder, more ferocious. A crazy idea sparked. I reached over and switched on my bedside lamp. The static receded slightly, as if dampened by the light. I turned the lamp off. It roared back to life. It was reactive. It only hit full volume when my apartment was dark. My logical fear began to melt away, replaced by a primal terror.
This wasn't a random technical glitch. It had rules. It was intentional.
I became a prisoner of the night. The dark circles under my eyes looked like bruises, and my design project stalled from my inability to focus. Every sunset brought a familiar, suffocating anxiety. I feared the darkness. I feared the silence before 2:13 a.m. because I knew with absolute certainty what would follow it. On the fifth night, I couldn't take it anymore. Anger and desperation won out over fear. Maybe a squatter had broken in, a homeless person looking for shelter. I had to end this. Gripping an aluminum baseball bat, I opened my door and stepped into the cold hallway, lighted by a single buzzing fluorescent light. I stood before the door to 4B. The static from within was a steady drone, like the breathing of some sleeping beast. I took a deep breath and raised my hand. The instant my fingertips touched the cold, painted wood of the door, the static cut out. The silence that followed was absolute, so profound it made my ears ring. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling uncontrollably. "Is anyone in there?" No reply. "Mr. Henderson, is that you? Checking on the place?" Still, only that dead silence. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Not a sound. No footsteps. No breathing. It was as if nothing had ever been there. I stood for a few minutes, my heart pounding. Finally, I backed away and returned to my apartment, a chill running down my spine. It knew I was there. It had reacted to me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, staring at the window, waiting, but nothing happened. 4B remained quiet. Had I scared it off, or was this all just in my sleep-deprived head? No, I couldn't accept that. The next night, I was prepared. I set my phone on a small tripod, started the voice recorder, and aimed it at 4B. I wanted proof. I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. Right on schedule, at 2:13 a.m., it began. The familiar, harsh static. I sat perfectly still in the dark, letting my phone's sensitive microphone capture everything. It went on for nearly an hour before ceasing as usual. The next morning, I put on my headphones and played back the recording. Just ear-splitting static. I listened again and again, hearing nothing else. Frustrated, I was about to delete the file when an idea struck me. The professional audio software I used for work could do more than just play sounds. I imported the file to my computer and opened a high-end audio editing program. I started experimenting. I ran it through a noise reduction filter, cut the high-end frequencies, and amplified the lower sub-audible frequencies. The screen showed the dense, chaotic waveform of the static. But underneath it, almost invisible, was another waveform, thin and fragile, like a faint heartbeat. I isolated it and started to slow it down, 10 times slower, 20 times. At first, it was just a meaningless, garbled rumble, but as I kept tweaking the filters, peeling away layers of noise, something began to form. A voice. the voice of an old man, hoarse and broken, as if coming from a throat scraped raw from screaming. It was speaking. And then, as clear as a funeral bell, I heard it, a single word repeated over and over between exhausted gasps. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. The headphones slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the desk. My entire body went cold. The blood froze in my veins. It knew my name. Mr. Langston's spirit was in that apartment, and he was calling for me.
From that moment on, I didn't go near his door. I kept my blinds shut tight, trying to ignore the existence of 4B. But I knew, no matter what I did, that tonight and the night after, at exactly 2:13 a.m., he would call for me again.
The haunting became my new normal. I worked mechanically during the day and lived in terror at night. My paranoid mind started cataloging things I'd never noticed before. A fresh scratch on my door frame, right near the lock. I was sure it wasn't there before. The smell of cheap, acrid cigarette smoke in the hall at odd hours, though no one on our floor smoked. I told myself I was imagining it, that fear was making me connect non-existent dots. But the voice on the recording haunted me. Ethan. Why my name? Mr. Langston and I were barely acquaintances. Why would he haunt me? Was his death not an accident? Was he trying to blame someone? Me? The thought was chilling. I racked my brain, replaying my last few interactions with him. Had I played my music too loud? Forgotten to hold the elevator door? There was nothing, absolutely nothing. The fear slowly gave way to an unbearable frustration. I couldn't live like this. I needed answers. I decided to confront Mr. Henderson. I caught him by the mailboxes in the lobby. Mr. Henderson, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to ask you about apartment 4B. He shot me an annoyed look. What about it? The place is sealed. Mind your own business. It's just, I've been hearing noises from in there at night, like a TV. Henderson let out a short, ugly laugh. You're hearing things, kid. I had the power company cut the juice the day after the cops left. There's not a single spark of electricity in that unit. You're working too late. Your mind's playing tricks on you. But I'm sure, I insisted. Can you just please check it for me? No, I'm busy. Don't bother me with this again, he snapped, turning and walking away. Henderson's certainty only deepened my confusion. If there was no power, how could the TV turn on? Where was the energy coming from? From Mr. Langston's rage? That night, I didn't record. Instead, I sat at my computer and opened the audio software again. I listened to the old recording, hunting for more clues. This time, I filtered the noise even more aggressively, amplifying the sub-audible frequencies to their absolute limit. And I found it. Buried deep beneath the sound of my name, hidden in the roar of the static, were other sounds, fragments of words
so distorted it was like trying to decipher a message from a dying star. I had to listen dozens of times, using my imagination to fill in the gaps. Back window. Watch out. Not me. A tremor went through my entire body. This wasn't a curse, it was a warning. Back window. Watch out. And most importantly, not me. He wasn't haunting me. He was trying to tell me something. But what? Whose back window? His? Mine? A horrifying thought shot through me. I ran to the back of my apartment, to the small kitchen window that looked out onto the rusted iron fire escape. I rarely opened it. My heart pounding, I checked the latch. It was securely fastened. I let out a shaky breath of relief. So it had to be Mr. Langston's back window. Someone had broken into his apartment that way, and maybe that person had caused his death? His heart attack wasn't natural. It was induced by fear. But why warn me? What did any of this have to do with me? The question gnawed at me. I turned to my laptop and started digging. Local news sites, community forums, the police department's online blotter. I searched for any reports of break-ins, burglaries, or prowlers in my neighborhood in the last 2 weeks. And I found it. A small blurb on a local news site. A police warning about a prowler spotted in the area. The MO was to watch people who lived alone, learn their routines, and then strike. No arrests had been made. The article was dated 3 days before Mr. Langston died.
The truth began to surface, and it was infinitely more terrifying than being haunted by a ghost. There was a monster out there, a real flesh and blood predator. And poor, quiet Mr. Langston had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the biggest question remained. Why was his spirit going to such lengths to warn me? The pieces clicked into place with cold, razor-sharp logic. The prowler's target was tended people who lived alone, like me. He studied their routines. As a freelancer, my schedule was predictable and consistent. My apartment and Mr. Langston's faced each other across the courtyard. From his living room window, one had a perfect, unobstructed view of my living room and workspace. A horrifying hypothesis formed in my mind, clear and sharp as glass. The prowler's target was never Mr. Langston. It was me. He'd used the fire escape to break into Langston's apartment, seeing it as the perfect low-risk observation post. He wasn't there to steal from an old man. He was there to watch me, to learn my habits, to wait for the perfect moment to make his move. But Langston must have woken up. Maybe he heard a noise, went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and came face to face with the intruder. The man threatened him, maybe just with a look, and Langston's weak heart gave out. He was collateral damage. And now, Mr. Langston's spirit, tethered to this world by unfinished business, was trying to do what he couldn't in life,
warn me.
All the supernatural phenomena suddenly made terrible kind of sense. The TV at 2:13 a.m., that was the exact time the prowler broke in that night. It only worked when my lights were off, because that's when I was most vulnerable and when the prowler would most likely strike. The violent static, the desperate attempt of a former TV tech to communicate through the only medium he truly understood. The voice calling my name, it was to get my attention. The warning about the back window, it was the prowler's point of entry. I was no longer afraid of Mr. Langston's ghost. I was grateful to him. My fear now had a face and a body. It was a real person, and he could be watching me right now. I checked all my locks, reinforcing the windows and doors with whatever I could find. A wooden dowel for the sliding window, a rubber doorstop wedged under the front door. I stopped turning off the lights when I went to bed, willing to pay any price on my electric bill for the illusion of safety. That night, right on schedule, the static erupted from 4B at 2:13 a.m. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just a blind, angry roar. It sounded urgent, frantic, and the light from the TV was no longer a chaotic mess of black and white dots. Bolder now that I understood, I pulled my blinds aside and looked. What I saw made my blood run cold. On the old television screen, through the waves of static, the dots were no longer random. They were coalescing, slowly, painfully, into an image. It was a grainy, flickering black and white picture, like a low-res security feed replaying from memory. It showed the view from inside Mr. Langston's kitchen, looking toward the back window. I saw a tall figure dressed in black, prying the window latch with a metal tool. The figure slipped inside with practiced ease. Then the frame shook violently, as if the person holding the camera, Langston's spirit reliving the moment, was trembling. The dark figure turned. His face was in shadow, but I could see his eyes gleam maliciously from under a dark beanie. He knew he'd been seen. The image on the TV degraded, the static intensifying as if scrambled by pure terror. I saw the figure lunge forward. I couldn't see what he did, only that the screen shook violently and then tilted sideways. And then came the most terrifying part. Just before the image dissolved back into a snowy chaos, the dark figure, the man who killed Mr. Langston, turned. He didn't look at the camera. He looked straight out the living room window of apartment 4B. He raised a single finger and pointed directly at my apartment. Directly at me.
The message was unmistakable. You're next. Then the TV screen went black. Apartment 4B was silent once more. But in my mind, the image played on a loop. I had seen my enemy, and he knew that I had seen him. The game of hide and seek was over.
I didn't call the cops. What would I tell them? That my dead neighbor's ghost showed me a movie on his unplugged TV? I think I was crazy. Or high. I was on my own. I didn't sleep. Adrenaline and sheer terror were a stronger stimulant than any coffee. I sat in my brightly lit living room, my hands strangling the aluminum bat. Every sense was on high alert. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind sent a jolt through my system. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 2:12. I held my breath. The numbers on my phone clicked to 2:13. No static. No sound from 4B. Nothing. The silence was unnatural. It was worse than the noise. What did it mean? That Langston's spirit was finally at peace? Or did it mean that tonight, the warning had become the reality? Thunk! A loud, sudden noise. Not from 4B, from the hallway. The sound of the breaker box being thrown. Every light in my apartment died. Sudden, absolute darkness swallowed me whole. I knew he was here. My ears rang in the sudden silence. Then I heard it. From the kitchen. The faint scrape of metal on metal as the back window was pried open. The snap of the cheap latch. He was in. I didn't scream. My throat closed up, seized by an invisible hand. I backed away, pressing myself against the cold wall, trying to melt into the shadows. I heard soft, almost silent footsteps on the kitchen floor. He was a professional. "Ethan," a low, raspy voice whispered from the darkness, laced with a sick, playful malice. "Going to bed so early? I know you're awake." He was toying with his prey. Poor old Langston. Such a weak heart. A mean look was all it took to send him off. How's your heart, Ethan? Is it strong? I didn't answer, fighting to control my ragged breathing. The bat was slick with sweat in my hands. Suddenly, a sound tore through the apartment. Screech! The TV from 4B, it roared to life with an impossible volume, louder than it had ever been before. The white light of the static blasted across the courtyard, sending strobing, ghostly shadows dancing across my walls. The prowler flinched. What the hell? But that wasn't all. My own television, which had been off, exploded with light and sound, its screen also filled with roaring static. The microwave in the kitchen began beeping incessantly, its green light flashing wildly. My laptop on my desk sprang to life, its screen a brilliant, blinding white. My entire apartment erupted in a cacophony of light and electronic noise. It was Mr. Langston. He was using every last ounce of his energy, not to warn me anymore, to fight with me. The chaos momentarily disoriented the prowler. He was blinded, deafened. His silhouette was perfectly framed against the wall by the flashing screens. It was my chance. A raw, inhuman scream tore from my lungs, a scream of pure, cornered animal terror and rage.
I surged forward, swinging the bat with all my might at the silhouette. The crack of the bat hitting his shoulder was sickeningly loud. He yelled in pain and stumbled, but he was strong. He scrambled back up, a long hunting knife now gleaming in his hand in the strobing light. We fell upon each other in a brutal primal struggle. He slashed with the knife, I parried with the bat. The blade sliced across my forearm, leaving a trail of hot blood. The pain was sharp, but I rammed the barrel of the bat into his gut. As he staggered, the TV screen in 4B flickered to an image, the image of his face, twisted and evil, lunging at Mr. Langston. He saw the reflection of that image on my own TV screen. He froze for a single second. A second of pure shock at being confronted by his crime by a force he couldn't comprehend. A second was all I needed. I put every ounce of my strength, my fear, and my desperation into one final swing, aiming for his head. There was a sickening wet crack. He collapsed to the floor and didn't move. And in that same instant, every screen in my apartment went black. The static from 4B died. Everything returned to darkness and silence. But this time, it was a peaceful silence. The cops came. The prowler was identified as a dangerous wanted felon. He had been watching me for 2 weeks. My story, as unbelievable as it was corroborated by my wound, the break-in, and the man lying unconscious on my floor. Mr. Langston's cause of death was officially re-examined as a case of manslaughter. I moved out the following week. I couldn't live in a place where those memories clung to every corner. I found a new, brighter apartment in a different neighborhood. But the scars, both on my arm and on my psyche, will never fully fade. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear the faint sound of static. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. The fear is a part of me now. I never got to thank Mr. Langston, but I think he knows. His spirit couldn't rest until he'd finished one last job, saving a neighbor he barely knew. He wasn't a terrifying ghost. He was a silent hero. One autumn afternoon, I visited his grave in a quiet cemetery outside the city. I placed a simple bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the headstone. The cool stone was engraved with just a few simple words. Arthur Langston, a good neighbor. I stood there for a long time, looking at the name that once filled me with such dread. Thank you, I whispered to the wind, for everything. You can rest now. A gentle breeze rustled the dry leaves, and it sounded like a sigh of release. For the first time in a long time, I felt a true sense of peace. The silence was no longer static.